Hey guys, welcome to the Reverie podcast. I am super excited to have Matt Nolan on today. Matt is actually you're a hero of mine and someone I've followed for many years, looked up to, and I haven't had a chance to play any of your cymbals, but you are a legend in this industry that seems to be kind of exploding right now. And you're one of the guys that's been doing it for a very long time, one of the best. So I'm super excited to chat with you and hear more about your story and your philosophy and all of that. So thank you so much for being on.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. I've got to live up to that intro now, haven't I?
I know.
That's quite something.
It won't be hard. It won't be hard. So I'm interested to know. I've researched you kind of in the earlier years, like 5 years ago. I was just researching all of the guys that were doing it and trying to get a sense for their backstory. So I've done some research on you, but I'd love to hear in your words how you got into doing this. I understand you studied engineering at
electronic engineering. So that was kind of silicon chip type stuff for broadband radio data. So stuff for TV, stuff for like Wi-Fi, stuff for cellular phones, stuff for broadcast video and TV and movie. All the electronics that kind of goes with that and the signal processing that goes with that.
So how did you transition from that work into working with metal?
Right. So I guess it was probably around about, probably a little earlier than 2005, really, when I sort of started getting really fascinated with cymbals, in particular, having sort of come back to acoustic drum set from a few years playing electronic, like the first or second Roland V drums, which were great for living in an apartment and not disturbing the neighbors. I started using them gigging as well, going through the PA, that kind of thing. But, eventually it's like, no, I want to get back to playing, real acoustic things. And I said the sax player in that band had another band. He needed a drummer, you call him Dep here, I think you call him Sub over there. Deputy substitute, and he said, "Oh, it'll just be like a garden party gig. Just bring a snare drum and a cymbal." And I was like, "Oh, what? Just one cymbal? No, I can't possibly." So I went on this quest for like the ultimate cymbal that does everything. And I guess eBay was a fairly new thing, at least over here in the UK, around about that time. And it was still in the days when you could buy and sell stuff and like more or less not lose any money. You're just paying for shipping, trying things out. So I went through a whole lot of cymbals and ended up with a couple of really cheap, beaten up old things. Zinn cymbals, actually, old British cymbals. There's some Italian connection there in the deep past as well.
Yeah.
Not great cymbals. One was nickel silver and the other was, I think it's actually B10. I was really curious because it didn't quite look like B8. And it had the small mounting hole like some of the older cymbals do. So I enlarged the hole, kept the shavings, took them to like the university chemistry department, said, "Hey, can you analyze and tell me what this is?" So B10, interesting. I still use that cymbal on my like low volume kits, actually quite nice. The nickel silver one had like really badly done rivet holes in it and a crack, and it was a piece of junk, really. It wouldn't have sounded good when it was new. Sorry, Zinn. But and I'd seen stuff about, like you cut a scallop out to get rid of a crack. That's the best way so the crack doesn't respread. And I just thought, I'm just going to go a bit wild with this. And I actually made it into the Batman logo. Sort of took all these scoops out, way more than I needed to. And it was a really interesting instrument. You could almost play melodies on it because it had all these different pitch tones. And I'd found this internet forum in my quest for the one cymbal. I found cymbalholic.com, which was at that time, I think, and ran for another decade or so. And then it kind of all petered out. I think Facebook and various other things kind of killed the forums, really, in a way. But lots of stuff learned there. And they had a competition. They decided, hey, let's have this like super grand title, International Solo Cymbal Competition. And the idea was, if you wanted to enter, you had to play a piece, compose and play a piece on one cymbal, like no shorter than 1 minute and no longer than 2. And it had to be one take. You couldn't do overdubs. You could like have multiple attempts to get it right, but like no layering of stuff, had to be an actual performance, just audio recording, MP3 it, upload it to one guy, email it to him. He anonymized them so no one knew whose was whose. And then everyone just voted on, which your favorite one was. So I used the Cymbat. Oh, this is the instrument I'm going to use. I thought that'll be great for this contest. It'll be fun to play it and sort of come up with a piece of music, really a short piece of music on a cymbal. And yeah, I came second. I won a little tiny little bell cymbal from Johan van der Sijpe, Belgian cymbal. Still around in those days, quite active on Cymbalholic. And then people started asking, can you make me a Cymbat?
Yeah.
Okay, so then I deliberately started buying cheap, bent, broken, cracked cymbals that were cracked in the right kind of way that still worked, that I could make this, and maybe made like 5 of the things. But then I sort of got the bug then.
Mm-hmm.
Also through Cymbalholic, I'd sort of come across the work of Steve Hubbard, Welsh guy, but kind of moves around all over Europe. So always living in a different country whenever you get in touch with him. It's like, oh, Iceland, no, Norway, no. Holland. Portugal, okay. But yeah, great guy. And for a brief while, he was back in Wales, which is pretty close to Bath. It's like maybe a drive, 2 hours less to where he was living at that time. Steve was trying to sell some of his works, some of his cymbals and gongs and things on the Cymbalholic forum, but kind of without photographs, without sound files, just with like a description, the size and what he thought they sounded like. And so he wasn't selling that many of them. And I bought one from him a while ago when he was in Iceland and been sort of stunned by it. It was this super visual work of art thing, like, way beyond anything I'd ever seen done before, which is, I guess, another part of my inspiration in starting doing this myself. So, yeah, he was trying to sell these things. And I thought, well, look, I've got the gear. I've got portable recording gear, camera and everything. We can come out, visit you, photograph these things, record them. They will sell a lot better on the Cymbalholic app when people can consume them properly, perceive them properly. And while we're at it, can you show me a little bit about how to hammer a cymbal? Because I've cut some of these cymbats into a shape, and some of them are like inverted, they're flips. And at that point, I'm like, oh, okay, so I guess I need to learn how to hammer and put tension and all that good stuff.
All the fun stuff.
And he kind of showed me a little bit. He like reworked something in front of me, but Steve is very intuitive. He just knows what he's doing, and he's not that great at putting it into words. These are the super total artwork gallery. It's all by feel. So he didn't really tell me anything, but I watched him. Okay. And what he did tell me was just do it, just try it, just pick up a hammer and start doing stuff. See what it does. So that's when I guess the snowball started to gain momentum and start to get bigger.
Yeah.
At 2005-ish, so I started making little things and just posting my progress on Cymbalholic. Maybe about 3 years after that, because 2008-ish, I was working for a startup company, and I don't know if you remember, around about 2008, maybe slightly later, there was like a tech stock market bubble crash thing.
Oh yeah.
So the investors had kind of seen this coming, and were saying, well, okay, we need to like slim down this startup company. So they like got rid of a whole department full of people, and then made a new, smaller department that we all had to apply, for a job in. But my first thought wasn't, oh crap, okay, I would need to revise and learn all my stuff so I can interview well. My first thought was, oh, wait, I could do the cymbal thing like as a job, or I could try to see if it works.
Right. Yeah.
So that there was some layoff money to be had if you were made redundant. And I thought, well, that can kind of get me to maybe Frankfurt Music Messe like the next March or April. It's just enough money to buy some stuff, keep living, make some things, rent a workshop, pay for the exhibit space, and then if it doesn't work, then go and get a real job again. And if it does, carry on. So that was my sort of very lucky break, really. to have a small bundle of money to last me for a few months to really sort of make a go of it, because I was kind of struggling to find the time. I wanted more time to spend on learning how to make cymbals, make gongs, other funny little like metal sculpture things that made sounds. And this was the opportunity to be able to spend that time.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that's really impressed me about your stuff is there seems to be equal parts an artistic visual element, but then that's never at the expense of the sound. So you seem to kind of have this grasp on both worlds of the visual and the sound and how they kind of come together. How did you come to that or how did you land on that pursuit and this idea of kind of marrying both of those worlds? Because I don't know very many other cymbalsmiths that actually are aiming at the visual. It's just like they're aiming at the sound.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess part of it comes from the sort of Steve Hoback inspiration, because his stuff was very visual. And also at the beginning, in the earlier years, I was like, I don't want to like try to recreate the old K.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to do it. The cymbal companies are trying to do it. The independents, one or two that are around are trying to do it. I want to do something else. Well, there's no point in slavishly trying to copy that. Although these days, I do. I gave in.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But back then, it's like, no, let's explore. Like, what else can you do? Sonically and visually. But of course, it still has to sound nice. It can't just sound like, like a piece of scrap metal or something. So I guess, yes, sound was always key. It was like, how do you, what's the word? How do you manifest a visual idea without compromising the sound? Or what's the best way to go about it? Should it be in the outline of the piece itself, or is that too extreme? Do you need to put that as kind of like a raised hammered pattern, maybe on a gong, rather than the shape of it, keep it round? Or is even that going to be too much? Would it be better as an engraved pattern, so it's not really messing with the shape at all? It depends on how extreme or otherwise it is what you're trying to do. So, or partly with maybe you do it with a patina, or a patina that you've etched some away or masked some off. So yeah, different ways of getting a visual result that will have varying degrees of effect on what it does to the sound, or I think things that are going to help you with the sound you're after.
Yeah,
you embrace them, and if they're going to work against it, then try to find another way.
Right. Yeah. I find that the visual element is important. I think people can kind of like, if they see a cymbal, that actually feeds into what they're perceiving as well, or what they're hearing. They kind of, I think people take in both elements at the same time. Because oftentimes, I don't know, I guess if you were to like A/B some cymbals with your eyes closed, oftentimes people would probably be surprised at what they thought was a 22-inch, or what they thought was a 20.
Yeah.
So like we take in a lot of information, I think, from what we see as well as like what we're hearing. So to see that you kind of, because I would say that currently I'm kind of aiming in that direction of bringing in elements of the visual, but using like abrasion treatment with patinas and various like hammering patterns, and combining, layering, all that kind of stuff. Because I think there is something there that is worth exploring, but it seems like there's plenty to explore in just the sonic realm, and then adding in that element of the visual ends up kind of like deepening the whole process of cymbal making to a pretty wide degree. So I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I think, well, we're all, if you've heard of synesthesia, we're all synesthetic to a degree. There is a crosstalk between the senses, like crisps taste better, or chips taste better if they're crunchy. If they're not so crunchy, they don't taste as good, but they actually taste exactly the same, more or less.
Right.
But the sensation and the sound makes a difference to your perception. There was some experiments I read about or saw on a TV program where they like took all these fruit juices and artificially colored them. And so they'd have like orange colored strawberry juice, or like green colored something else, orange juice. and people couldn't tell what it was, or they'd say the wrong thing because the visual was messing with the taste. It's like crazy.
It's fascinating.
You don't have to be this sort of savant who has this massive stuff like you can see music or whatever. It's just subtle interplay between your senses.
I try to ignore what I see oftentimes because I think it can color what I'm kind of from the manufacturing standpoint. It can kind of color what I'm perceiving if I'm like going based off the visual too much, especially if I'm trying to do a commission where I'm matching a certain sound from a record. You know, it's like
right.
It can be a hindrance as well as like an element of perception that is maybe on the positive side of things.
Yeah, I think blindfold testing is very valuable, or just closing your eyes and playing something and listening to it, or having someone else play it so you don't know if they're playing A or B or whatever.
So I've done a lot of research. I've seen your gongs, your triangles. I've heard you've done a lot of work for orchestras. You made some pieces for Bjork. Is that correct?
Yes. That was, I guess, the first thing that really got me into doing pitch things, tuned to notes. Although I still don't do like, a glockenspiel or anything with a full keyboard. Apart from the thing for Bjork.
Yeah, right.
But other things, it's like bell plates, bass chimes, the little extra things for existing instruments, but not like full sets, generally tuned stuff. But yeah, I did that for Bjork, which was great. I got involved via a chap in Brooklyn who was working with her on something else. He was originally from MIT, and he was like trying to find a cymbal company that could do this thing that she'd asked for, which originally was 42-inch hi-hats. And he like emailed a couple of places, and they just said, "Oh yeah, no problem," or they'd said no.
Yeah.
The only person who said yes, but there will be all these problems, and so that's the guy.
Yeah. Maybe it was like something they were doing to weed out people, like actually find the person that would know.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, but it's going to be really deep, really low, really slushy sounding. Or we make them really thick, and it's still going to be a bit of a problem. And you'll need like a robotic stand and probably robotic giant sticks.
Right.
And he's like, "Yeah, it's the idea." It's like, oh, okay.
Wow.
I think I made a little like demo video with like a couple of 20-inch ride cymbals, or went from like 8-inch things to 14 to 20, just to kind of show the progression and how things were happening.
Yeah.
And I think what else? I think I said like, could we like make it like a meter, like 39 instead of 42, because that gives me a lot more freedom with what materials I can use. Are you dead set on 42? I think it's just like 3 times as big as 14. So they were okay with that, and then they were like, "Oh, it's kind of expensive, so it's a lot of work."
Yeah.
And then I think they just went off the idea, had a different idea. So the Bjork had this idea about Indonesian gamelan, the sort of metal keybar polyphonic stuff, or they all sort of play in octave unison, that kind of thing, hit with that bone or antler like hammers that they used to play those. So the high pitched ones.
Yeah.
The ones that use like softer things, like sort of yarn wrapped type mallets. But she wanted that sound kind of in a little box that could be played with MIDI as well as like acoustically.
Interesting.
And so again, this guy Andy Cavatorta was like, "Okay, Matt could probably do that, or maybe if we hook him up with Björgvin, who's a guy in Iceland who makes pipe organs."
Okay.
And they have lots of like electro actuation, solenoids and things that push hammers and open stops and all that kind of thing. And I think Bjork already had a Celeste, which is it's basically a glockenspiel in a piano case, 5-octave glockenspiel in a piano case. It's like the sound on Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy.
Oh yeah,
very celestial, hence the name. Sort of twinkly and quite mellow. So it was like, can we use this as a donor instrument and change it so that it sounds like gamelan?
Interesting.
That was basically the plan. So it's like, okay, take out all the steel tone bars and replace them with bronze ones, and I'm not going to tune the overtones like they do on a vibe bar, so that it sounds like gamelan. It's got all those discordant overtones. Try to figure out, okay, well, they sent me the dimensions of all the existing keys from Iceland, so that I could sort of start making them, make sure they would fit, they wouldn't be too big. And then I think what happened, I was in Frankfurt at the Music Messe, which is like a sort of European NAMM show, or was. And I checked my email on the first day after arriving, and it's like, we kind of need this a lot sooner than we originally said. Is it, is it possible to rush it? Because Björk wants to use it on the record rather than using samples. She wanted it originally for the live tour, something to take around with it. But then she said, no, I want that instrument on the album, which was basically finished already. I was like, I've just arrived at this place where I'm going to be for a week. And so, okay, how do we do this? Okay, so originally I was going to make these bars, ship them to Iceland. They were going to fiddle with them. If they had any problems, they'd, get back to me. So, okay, I'll bring them to Iceland. We'll put them all in together, figure out any problems. I'll bring a bunch of tools.
Wow.
And so it was like a week mad rush, like 2 or 3 days in the UK, 2 or 3 days in Iceland, figuring stuff out with Björk and I'd take a spare bronze, drill bits, and angle grinders, my sort of special tuning machine that I'd bought just to do this project.
Wow.
And I think in the main, it was fairly straightforward. Like all the upper notes and the lower notes worked okay, but there was about an octave in the middle that just wasn't quite sitting right. So I think the lower ones I'd use like 2 millimeter thick, and then I transitioned to 3 millimeters for the top 2 octaves. It just worked better. But I moved that transition point down like half an octave or so, and it just made it more smooth. The graduation in sound was good. And then there were like some weird ones, like the resonators were bringing out like a weird overtone somewhere. So some of the 1 or 2 bars here or there just needed like changing or a bit of grinding on the underside just to move that overtone and then retune the fundamental. Then it was like all working, and then the electronics boards that drive the hammers died. Like a couple of the chips fried in them. It's like, I don't know what to do. But luckily, electronic background came in, and we were able to kind of make that. I think there was like a motherboard thing, and then there were like 2 daughter cards, which each did like 3 octaves each, maybe. And we looked at the notes from the MIDI files that we're going to be playing to do the recording to see, well, which notes do you need and which notes don't you use, and which ones are fried. And by swapping the daughter boards around, it actually gave us all the notes we needed. Just about.
Wow.
But all the sensitivities had changed because they're all like manually adjusted. So then we had to adjust all that again. So it was literally morning that Björk and the recording engineer came in, it was finished just at the last second.
Oh my gosh. Was that incredibly stressful, or was that just a fun project?
It was mainly fun. I think I might have been slightly tetchy at breakfast that morning because it was but then once it was like working and everything's fine and people are coming in, you just kind of calm down. It's like, okay, it's going to work. It's going to go.
It's going to be okay. Wow, man. Do you, so obviously there's like I would imagine there's a pretty large difference between working with pitched instruments that are going to orchestras and then drum set cymbals. But I imagine that you take a lot of, you talked about like shaving away a little material to kind of notch a certain overtone. I imagine you would take the knowledge you have from this world, if you would call them separate worlds, I don't even know, but I'd imagine you would take that information and it would inform how you would approach making a drum set cymbal and how you would approach balancing tension in that cymbal. And if you have certain overtones that you're not liking, how you would kind of notch a drum set cymbal, given obviously that we're not dealing with specific pitches necessarily, but we are working with lots of different tones that kind of work into this balance with the cymbal. And talk to me a little bit about that. Do you think about those things? Do you kind of try to marry those worlds a little bit, or do they kind of live on their own?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess having done a number of interviews and thought about this a bit before, I have a reasonably good answer for this. I kind of combine sort of two things here in my work. Like there's an artistic musical sense and a very analytical engineering sense. And usually those two things, you don't get them strongly like in the same person. I mean, there are examples, there are many examples, but usually you're one way or you're the other.
Exactly.
Much stronger in analysis, or you're much stronger in intuitive and artistic. So I guess I have, a reasonable amount of both, and they talk to each other, and I can apply them to what I'm doing. And I guess you're saying about, bringing things learned in pitched instruments and putting them into sort of indefinite pitch and moving overtones around. There are all sorts of examples from even things that aren't instrument making, where you'll take an idea or a concept and bring it into what you're doing, find how you can apply that. Trying to think of a really good and bizarre example. I read a newspaper article about baseball bats, or a newspaper article about a scientific paper about baseball bats. And they were saying that there's like two sweet spots where the ball hits the bat. One of them gives you the most throw, the ball, the distance it'll go. And one of them gives you the least shock in your hands where you're holding it. And I thought, that's really interesting. And they're slightly different points, and it's all about nodes and resonance and all that kind of thing. And maybe a couple of years later, I'm like making beaters for triangles. And some of the orchestral guys really, really hate hearing the beater. They just want to hear the triangle. They don't want any click or tick. They just want the sound of the triangle. So that kind of informed, okay, what can I do sort of engineering-wise to this beater to minimize its self-noise, when you strike the triangle with it. And the baseball bat thing sort of plugged straight into that. So there's always, odd things. And anything you learn about, there's often something you can apply somewhere else if you think about it. Or you spot pattern things like this works like that and that works like that. So this thing from that field can maybe be used in this field, reapplied. So I guess a lot of that, not necessarily consciously, sometimes consciously, and other times it's just.
Yeah, like you were talking about intuition.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about intuition with Steve Hubbock, and I find that to be kind of a difficult thing because I'm fairly young. I haven't had near as much experience in this industry as you. And as I grow and my technique grows, I find that there's intuition, there's technique, and they kind of, inform each other, and hopefully they kind of become one thing. Mm-hmm. But in the beginning, you kind of have that, I guess, beginner's luck where you don't really have any technique. You're just kind of swinging a hammer, trying to figure out how the metal functions. And you can land on these pretty interesting sounds, without really knowing anything that you were doing. You're just kind of like going by feel. And then, years down the road, I would look back on some of the first cymbals I ever made that I liked, that I thought had some kind of vibe. And it was like, okay, how now do I maybe capture some of that, those sounds when I really had no technique and it was all just emotion and feel. And it becomes this kind of, it's a very interesting pursuit to try to work with, like letting go of what you're trying to do and just letting your intuition take over, but then also having the technique to execute and those kinds of worlds. I would imagine that's kind of part of what you're discussing with kind of this analytical side and this artistic side and how they can work maybe in tandem with each other. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I agree. And you talk about like revisiting really old work. I mean, there have been some instances where I've not been able to do it. It's like I've learned so much, I can't do what I did in the beginning anymore, or certain aspects of it. What have I overlearned?
Yeah.
Then other times you you can sort of go back and say, okay, well, what did I do? Almost reverse engineer your own work, really. Although there's a lesson there as well, which is like take notes, write down what you did. And then later you can maybe go, okay, right, yes. Initially, I didn't write anything down. Then I went through a period of like documenting everything every day. And now I'm just like, remembering like, what was the weight of that? And like maybe a couple of notes about, the cut was kind of like this. It's kind of ebbed away again a little bit, but it's funny. Like sometimes, someone will see something that I made and wants, another instance of it, and I think, well, can I do that again? Or can I do it close enough again that they're going to be happy with it? I mean, every instrument is different. Every instrument is unique. So you just got to capture enough of the vibe of the prototype model. And the same if someone's trying to get you to make, well, there's this cymbal in this video that whoever is playing, can you get that sound or that sound but a bit brighter, or that sound but lower pitch? Sort of X plus delta,
right?
Kind of thing. So yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes I get really paranoid about that, and you almost freeze and put off. Like, I'll do that tomorrow. I'll do that. Because you're frightened that you won't recreate it again. And then eventually you just do it, and 95% of the time it works.
Right. Yeah, I find that a lot of times I'm almost like trying to discourage people or trying to give a ton of caveats, because when someone reaches out saying, hey, you made this cymbal, can you make one just like it? I usually just kind of say no, but I can, hopefully get close to that vibe. I've got
the you can make like a sibling of that cymbal.
A sibling. Yeah, exactly. And then
maybe not a twin, but
not a twin, but maybe a sibling, 1 or 2 years difference. And especially when people say, there's this record, I love the ride cymbal sound, can you create that? The way I take it oftentimes is I do research on the record, try to figure out how it was recorded, and then you kind of have to think ahead to be able to create a cymbal that sounds behind the kit the way that cymbal sounded through mics, and through, and there's all these different variables you got to think about that not a lot of people pay attention to.
Yeah, there's so much in the recording studio, or the venue, and the stuff they're using, the player, like all those, modify the sound of that cymbal. You could make a perfect clone of that, and they wouldn't get the sound in their room with their sticks, with their touch. So you're always shooting for ballpark rather than like totally dialed in.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the greatest example is the Nefertiti ride. Like, I'm sure you've had many people say, hey, can you make me a Nefertiti clone? And I mean, Paul Francis told me that he had that cymbal in his shop for months, and he's like, man, that thing was kind of heavy. And, the people that just played it, I would put it up and people would come and hit it and go, oh, okay, cool. And then he would tell them that's actually the Nefertiti ride. And they would just kind of just kneel in shock. And it's true. It's kind of like, most jazz drummers that played the Nefertiti ride probably wouldn't have thought twice about it if they didn't know, so
yeah, quite probably.
A lot of people will say, can you make me a Nefertiti ride? I want it to be like 2,100 grams at 22 inches. And I'm like, no.
No.
You play it very, very, very quietly. Maybe you could get vague hints of Tony there.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if I make one like that, I'm usually around 2,700, but people always say, can you make it lighter?
Yeah.
Well, just try it at 2,700 and see what you think.
Right. Yeah. It's, and that's something too, that's, I find that there's a good amount of almost, I don't know that this is necessarily our responsibility as the makers, but I almost feel like a sense of responsibility to help train the customers, even to kind of know what to expect a little bit more, because I find that like the big companies, the way they market cymbals is in so many ways incredibly disingenuous and incredibly vague, purposefully vague. And it's I find a lot of drummers they don't really know what they want. They kind of have a vague sense of the sound they have in their head, but there aren't companies out there or people out there kind of helping them understand how to take that vague sense and put it into something practical.
Yeah.
So
Although
I wonder at what degree is our responsibility to help kind of train our customers in a way.
That's a very good question. I mean, to a degree, there's a fundamental problem that you can't really put a sound precisely into words. You know, we all hear and experience things differently, and I don't know, we have the vocabulary to precisely put a sound into words. There's a Frank Zappa quote which almost applies here. I think he once said, "Talking about music is like dancing about architecture."
Yes, yes,
Right.
perfect. Yeah,
So
it's awesome.
But you know, there are things you can try to do. You know, which is often why I try to encourage. You know, if someone wants a specific sound, you know, well, like, do you have a reference? Do you have a video? Do you have a sound recording? Or you know, do you have one of my previous cymbals that there's a video of that it's close to, and then we'll work. Yes. You know, in relation to that, not necessarily a copy of that, but like relative to that, it's drier or it's lower pitched or it's that 22 in a 20, that kind of thing. So you're avoiding too much language about the very specifics. You know, if you start with the sound already,
yeah,
you're just talking about how different from that sound it is. But I mean, like dry and dark. I mean, I'm not even sure I know myself exactly the difference between dry, dark in a cymbal.
yeah. Because on the extreme levels, it makes sense, but then when you're talking about the varying degrees within,
yeah, if it's just a nuanced amount, then
yeah,
how to distinguish really?
It's very hard to classify. I was originally last weekend I was trying to make a video about cymbal terminology, and I spent all this time filming, and I got to the editing portion. And I was like, I don't want to do. I just scrapped the whole project because it ended up being. The second I kind of dove into that world, it opened up, and I realized I don't have the slightest hint of an idea how to even approach this because it's so vague and subjective, and there's so many nuances and varying degrees between the dark and bright and complex and warm and all these things that I think I need to sit on that idea for probably another few months at least before I can maybe try and approach that subject. But it seems like an important subject maybe for just to help. I find that, like, personally, I studied music at university and tried to be a professional musician, and I just know that personally I knew nothing about the sound I wanted. I just had like Tony and Elvin in my head, and that was what I was. What kind of cymbal sound do you want? Elvin, that, but what does that mean? I didn't have any idea what it meant. So I'm trying to like put myself in my own shoes almost 10 plus years ago and see like, okay, what would be a beneficial way to approach sharing about this instrument that could help people sort of tackle some of these terms and help them actually achieve the sound they want, so that they're not having to buy 50 cymbals just to buy and sell 50 cymbals just to find one that they're like they can compromise and say, okay, this will be my main ride, until their tastes change and then they move on to something different.
Yes, yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how you would do it. Maybe because I know it's a while since I've looked at a cymbal website, like Peisteel's, whoever. But I remember Peisteel have got like their own set of terms for everything. Like they talk about mix and blend and all this. I can't remember the other terms they use, but it seems like they know what they mean.
Yes.
Right? Applies to each of the symbols, the different ways they describe them makes sense. But I think somehow they need to communicate to the drummer what those terms mean. And zillion people have other sort of groups of nomenclature and terminology that they use. So maybe it needs to come with, you need sound examples, maybe. Like, okay, this cymbal is better than this one. This cymbal is drier than this one. to try to define the terms
Mm.
so that both people, or the makers and the people wanting to buy the cymbals, have a common reference, that ties that word to that sound.
Right. So we're speaking on the same plane. We're kind of speaking the same language, at least when we approach each other. I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on where the industry is now versus where it was when you were getting your start in it. Because obviously was there 2 or 3 other guys doing what you were doing when you started?
One of these days, when I have like a holiday or something, I'd like to research the history, really, of independent cymbalsmiths. I have this notion, but it is probably not quite accurate, just based on when I started and who else was around. It feels like they're sort of generations in a way.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like Roberto Spizzichino was the first independent cymbalsmith, certainly in modern times. I'm sure at some point the Turkish companies were like one guy or 2 guys. Mm-hmm. And then around a similar time, not that much later, you've got sort of Hubback and Michael Paisty coming in, I think. I don't really know when Johan van der Sijpe and when Mike Skiba, when they started exactly. I know they were active on Cymbalholic in 2005-ish. Mm. And telling stuff about how they made things, which was interesting because they came from very opposite angles. I mean, it was great, actually. Sort of, this is Johan's approach and his beliefs of how it should work, and these are Mike's, and they're not the same. They're quite at odds with each other. And just a slight tangent, when I started making things myself, only when I started making things and understanding things, I was like, that's what they were talking about. It like made sense when I discovered it myself. We were reading it just off the page, with no experience. So, well, okay, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
But so back to generations. So I don't know if they're like the second generation, those guys, or if they're sort of one B.
Yeah.
Then I think you've sort of got me, Matt Bettis, Craig Laritz, and actually Dave Collingwood, early days. He sort of started, then stopped, and then started again. We all kind of started around that sort of 2005-ish time, I think. And there were a couple of others. There was a chap called Helga Dischans in Germany or Denmark, I think. And maybe a couple of other ones, I'm not sure. And then it feels like since then, like, and each generation is bigger. There's more people in it as more information gets out. The internet got bigger. It was more easy to find information about how you make a cymbal, or to know that you can buy blanks. To be able to get in touch with a foundry in Turkey or Germany or China or wherever you're getting your blanks from. There's so much more information now, so it's a lot more accessible. And so I don't know what generation we're in now or what you're in, but there are, I don't know, 30, 40 at least. Yeah. In Brazil and all over Europe and Australia, probably 5 or 6 in the States, right?
Yeah, there might be more than that even. Maybe over 10.
Yeah, so it's fascinating how it's bloomed. This craft.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I'm interested to see where it goes from here, because we're here. And there is a ton of people right at the beginning stages of doing this, and kind of making their first cymbals. They've just built a lathe. They've just, they're just now starting to get into making different types. I'm interested to see the longevity of kind of the wider group, and if it doesn't kind of narrow out.
Yeah. Yes. How long they'll keep going at it, because I guess there are multiple factors, aren't there? There's whether you have a talent for it, whether you have a passion for it. Whether other things in your life get in the way or not, or open doors for you. I know Michael Paisty, like, not that many people know about him. He doesn't self-promote at all. And he lives in a very expensive country, Switzerland. Cost of living in Switzerland is very high.
Yeah.
So his cymbals are naturally expensive, especially for people outside of Switzerland. And the, shipping to the US, for example, is quite a lot. So he should be way more well-known, way more popular. His work is incredible. So that's a slight tangent into how just your circumstances and your approach can have a big impact on how successful you are. Yeah, so it would be very interesting, 5-10 years from now, who out of the sort of current crop who was starting, as you say, building their own lathes, like being a Jedi, you're going to build your lightsaber or your lathe.
Right. Get your kyber crystal.
Like almost everyone has to build one, right? Because you can't buy a cymbal lathe.
Someone's gonna eventually start selling one and just pre-built kind of thing, and that would be a good business opportunity for someone out there. Just build lathes for the new Cymbalsmiths.
Yeah, but it'd be interesting to see in 5-10 years down the road who's still doing it, who's doing well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really know today what the sort of average drummer awareness of independent cymbalsmiths is. I know when I started, it was like most people were like, really? That's a thing?
Yeah.
I think there's a little more awareness now. I don't know, what's your take on that in terms of your everyday drummer?
I tend to think that it's still under the radar. And it could be that it kind of blooms and explodes and becomes a more mainstream thing. I think of like Drumeo, the online drum instruction thing, kind of that Drumeo world. I would imagine that most people that would be Drumeo subscribers would have no idea that people are making handmade cymbals. And I see it as something that could eventually be as common and well known as anything else, but it would take a larger organization kind of to break it open into the masses. I hope it happens, because I kind of think, I think there's enough of us and there's enough to go around. And I think if the average drummer knew about what you did or what Collingwood does or what I do, then it would be, I would think it would be just very, very enticing for the average drummer to be like, oh, I can have my own cymbal made to my specs, and I could find different makers that have vibes and sounds that I like, and I could sort of mix and match and create my own set from my favorite independent cymbalsmiths. If anything, I would love to kind of break apart that brand loyalty stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything against the big brands at all, but this whole sort of brand loyalty or even range loyalty, like people who just play Zildjian K customs or whatever, it's like, but what?
Why?
It's very sort of like throw an A in there, or throw a Bosphorus in there, or
there's something.
Like, listen to what. But having said that, I think there are two kinds of drummers. There are the kind who want to explore, want to be very individual, would think the idea of a custom cymbal to their specification is fabulous. And there's probably another bunch who like knowing, okay, this is what I'm going to get. It's the same as the cymbal I bought last time. It's the same as that guy's playing. But they want something comfortable. They want something that's a very known quantity. The idea of specifying something might be a scary thought. So, well, I don't, like we're saying, how do you put it into words?
Right.
So I think there'll always be people who think it's great, and people are like, it's not for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to buy this Paiste. I'm going to buy this Istanbul Mehmet.
Right.
Something from a range that I kind of know what it's going to be.
Yeah, and then that's the challenge for independence is some of us. I find myself kind of fighting this of how much do I try to systematize and make series and do all this kind of stuff to try and maybe bring in the drummer that needs a little bit more structure, because I noticed at the beginning when I would just individually label every cymbal that I made, that I was limited by a lot of the people that you're talking about that just they need something a little bit more like in a box, not in a bad way, but just something a little bit more
Yeah.
classified, you know,
Mm-hmm.
sort of understand what they're going to get. And so I try to live kind of in between the world of every cymbal is a unique creation, and also the world of series, and kind of see if I can blend both and say, this series will give you this kind of aura or vibe. And there's all these unique pieces within this series. But if you're looking for something kind of complex and Bill Stewart-ish, then this is what you want to go with. And if you're looking for something more mellow and warm, this is kind of the series that, but there's varying degrees of doing that. There's guys that are doing, like Nicky Moon is doing series, and he's going for like replicating as best he can. Same with Mangiello, like really classifying their stuff well, and they can sell to drum shops. They can, and then it's very easy to just kind of replicate orders and get them out. I kind of feel like I'm like in the middle trying to figure out where to land with it,
Yeah, I guess it's how big are the boxes you put things in.
Yeah.
You're making yours a little bigger, which is
right. Maybe a little. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Good way to do it.
Yeah. Here's a question. I've been as for the independents that hand form bells.
Yes.
I'm very interested to hear you talk about your philosophy with that, because I've done it ever since the beginning, and I kind of go back and forth on it, what I like about it, drawbacks. And you seem to be one of the pioneers that really established like this method for making cymbals that, for people that don't know, start out as a completely flat blank, and then you actually find the center hole, hammer in the type of bell you want, the shape, all that kind of stuff. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I guess it's partly by accident of how I started out, right? So originally, after I'd, sort of more or less finished just reworking, not great cymbals and trying to make them better or more interesting. So obviously you're starting with something that generally has a bell then. The first material I was able to get was sheet metal. It wasn't cymbal blanks, so there's no option to have a cup already pressed in. So from the outset, I was hand hammering cups into cymbals. Then I think the first blanks I got hold of were from Wieland, from the German foundry that makes them for Paiste and I think probably they're doing stuff for Sabian these days as well.
That's the 602 series. That's where they
get. So their B20s is for the 602s and possibly the 20 series as well. I'm not sure if those blanks are made in Turkey or just hammered in Turkey. The oxide color of them is quite pinky, which makes me think they're made in Germany, because they look quite like the 602 blanks. And Paiste would probably like that consistency.
Yes.
So, and I think was it Sound Formula with that?
Yeah,
I think older line. I think that was that B20 as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Those blanks are flat. Paiste presses the cups in themselves.
Okay.
So I had to sort of start hand hammering those. And at the beginning, if I was trying to get an extreme cup, either a sharp edge on it or a very tall one, it would crack. And I was like, this is a problem. and then the metallurgist guy there said, well, yeah, you'll need to temper it. We don't fully temper them. We just temper them enough to shear them. They're not fully as soft as you might want them to be to hand hammer. In fact, he didn't even think I could hand hammer. Even if I did pre-temper them, he thought I might need to do it like multiple times.
Wow.
So I thought, okay, so let's build like a furnace type thing and try to heat these blanks up so that I can successfully get cups, bells hammered into them. So I did that. It's like building a lathe, you build a furnace.
Yeah.
And I was in a Home Depot type store here in the UK, and they had this like celebrity chef barbecue thing, like grill. There was this big, nice round dome with 3 legs, and I thought that's a great size. You get a decent blank in that. But it's a bowl, basically. There's no lid on it or anything. And it was relatively expensive. I didn't really want to pay that money. But then I saw someone was selling one on eBay, used. Great, okay, I'll have that. And I sort of used the bowl, turned it upside down, used it as the lid on the thing, made a base, put like gas burners in it, propane, and figured out the sort of the copper piping to plumb it all in. Got myself a carbon monoxide alarm just to make sure I wasn't gassing myself. Spoke to a guy who did pottery, and he makes kilns, and he was saying about, get this like ceramic fiber insulation stuff, and you put that inside, ceramic shelves as well, and drill holes in, and all this stuff. And so it's sort of part of the design idea came from him, and part just came from figuring it out myself. And it worked fairly well first time. And I thought, I get twice the thickness of insulation in here. There's still room. And then it worked much better than it got up to temperature real quick and stayed there. You just adjust the flow rate. And got a thermocouple in there telling me what temperature it's at. Got a big tank of water to quench them in. And so yeah, that's been great fun building that and using it. And in some instances, you buy a blank or buy a cupped blank sometimes, because if I want a really sharp bridge transition, I'll buy a cupped one, because it's hard to hand hammer that in and not have it crack, or to get it sharp enough.
Right.
But I do like the flexibility of hand hammering them if I can, just to give me any size, any shape, whatever I want, rather than having to deform someone's existing one, especially if you want to change the size, because it's pretty much impossible to do that nicely.
Yeah.
So just to have more control, I do like hand hammering them where I can.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes I'll have a blank and it'll have been on my shelf for 2 years and it'll have got hard again. So I'll temper it, and it's all lovely and buttery and easy to hammer.
Yeah. See, that's something that's kind of a dream for me, is having a tempering furnace.
Yeah, I think Nicky's just made one recently. He was asking me, he sent me a picture of it. Said, "Hey, look, all ready to go."
Yeah, nice.
He's got one. I've got one. I think Taviano.
Yeah.
Have one. I don't know if other people do. I know Michael Feisty, sometimes there's a bell foundry near him, and he just takes them there and they do it for him.
Okay, cool. Taking the easy way out, right?
Yeah, the easy way.
Yeah, it's for me, it's kind of come to the point where I will order blanks, and then just as soon as they're in the shop, I'm like rapidly trying to get the bells for them, just so that they're trying to work with it as fresh bronze as I possibly can. Yeah,
I guess for people who don't know, that it's like an exponential decay. It's like a cup of coffee. It gradually goes cold, and the blanks gradually go hard over time. And they change most early on. It's like a curve. So they change a lot in the first few days, and then it slows down. Same as when you've hammered it. The sound is a bit tight, open when you've just hammered it, and it opens up. Maybe even overnight, most of the sound will come, and then you get a little bit more and a little bit more. But
yeah,
maybe 2 weeks, like 99% of it's there. Apart from how it will change anyway with playing. But yeah, one thing I found when I started tempering the German blanks was that actually the sound came back a lot quicker when I'd been hammering them without tempering them. They would take weeks to actually open up and be able to hear what they're actually sounding like.
Wow.
That was an interesting, okay. We never figured that.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Probably because they sort of suffered more crystal deformation from the hammering in a pre-existing hard state rather than being soft, and so it takes longer for things to realign.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fascinating.
It's kind of like thermodynamics and stuff like that, and equilibria.
Yeah, right. That's so fascinating. Yeah, that's kind of the next worlds I'm entering into are going to be getting a machine hammering set up, a trip hammer kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just for
Save your arm.
save the arm a little bit, basic formation stuff, and then a tempering furnace, and just start to slowly mess with that kind of stuff. Um, I do a lot of modifications currently. I don't know how. Yeah, I don't know how long into the future I'll be doing the modifications because those are just so incredibly limited. But especially given that those are like, those can be years and years old, decades old, even if I'm getting them in the shop. And then you're
Yes, that could be risky to work on.
very, very, yeah, very risky. And I just keep like what I've learned over the years is just keep just a batch of cymbals that are kind of general shapes and sizes, so that if someone sends me a cymbal, I swing a hammer and it just cracks. It's like I got something I can at least give it to them and say, hey, swap it out for you,
Yeah,
but
it's an extreme modification.
yes, extreme as can be. But yeah, being able, I don't know, would you ever temper an existing, like an existing cymbal? I'm guessing you would probably have to like strip the surface, maybe like.
I mean, you can. I have done it a couple of times, and it's risky because if there are like micro cracks in there already, then tempering it is just going to turn that into a big crack.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
So yeah, I'll usually like do a skim lathe to see kind of what's going on with the surface, see how it sounds. Like a soft mallet on the edge is really good for that. Sort of moving your ear around if you can hear any like hissing stuff going on.
Yeah.
Maybe there's in there. Yeah, because I don't think you can. I don't think you can heal. You can soften them up again, but I don't think you can heal cracks. Even like my issues, they're just going to get bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe that would be something I haven't thought about it to this moment, if that would even be a practical thing to anneal an older cymbal just to.
I mean, the other thing is it will essentially turn into a blank again. It's going to collapse and it's going to go all wavy.
Yeah.
So it's not like if you just want to change the shape a little bit,
right?
No, you've got to pretty much rehammer the thing. It retains its stretched nature,
okay,
but it kind of collapses down. So it will rehammer back quicker than if you were starting from a blank. But then it can be difficult when the profile gets too high.
Yeah,
a lot more hammering around the edges to stretch things out again.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, swings and roundabouts with retempering an existing fully formed cymbal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I did get some blanks from Koide because some interesting alloys, and I was trying to get a very specific sound, a really bright, long sustaining bright sound, and I thought that's the alloy that's going to do that. And they're like, well, you can't hand hammer this. Like we press this and then we do a little bit of hammering over the top. It gets really hard, really fast. And I was like, well, I'm going to try.
Yeah.
I retempered that hammering the cup 3 times. You just hear and feel it sort of getting really like tight. Hammered maybe like a third of the cup and a third of the profile. Then I tempered it again, and then sort of up to 2/3, and then tempered it again.
Wow.
Because I was just so scared, like it's gonna crack. It's gonna.
Yeah. Is it that they have like traces of I want to say titanium, but is it not? It's not titanium. It is.
Yeah, okay. It is. Yeah, okay. It's like a B23, which has some titanium and some zirconium in. So they're both hard things. And it's like 0.1% or something. It's very little, but it's enough to sort of disrupt the crystal lattice. It's like dispersed around just to make it hard.
Right.
Because I was trying to sort of replicate Espizzichino. He did stuff with tempering that made the cymbals very bright and very great, but also quite brittle. A lot of
sketchy stuff.
Sketchy stuff. So it was one half of an orchestral pair. So I'm trying to make a mate for the surviving half.
Wow.
And I did a first attempt with Turkish. And I thought it's just not got. It's like it sounds similar. It's got the same kind of character, but the highs just sustained much longer in this Espizzichino than in the Turkish. And I thought it's because it's really hard, isn't it? That's what it is. But I can't try to do what he did because we'll have the same problem again.
Right. Yeah.
So then I thought, let's try this Koide stuff, because I spoke to Burke and he said, oh yeah, if you want to buy some blanks, we can sort something out. Put you in touch with Toshio-san in Japan. And so I just got like 2 18s that they happened to have lying around that were about the right weight. And, did one, and it's got that effect. The highs just sustain longer, which is just what I needed.
Wow, that's interesting.
Temper it 3 times to get and not have it crack.
Would those blanks, that metal composition, would that be a better way if you were trying to go about replicating some old Ks, like as they would sound today? Like it would starting with that kind of blank, would that be a way to get there, you think?
I don't know, because old Ks are not. That's not really a characteristic they have. I wouldn't say they're more sort of dark and rounded. But are you talking about trying to recreate what they would sound like when they were new?
No, it's more just the aging process. Not necessarily like an older K. I mean, it could be an older A, but just essentially like the bronze hardening over the course of 50 or 60 years. Would there be some kind of correlation between this B23 with titanium and maybe the harder nature of that alloy? Could that be like kind of a stand-in?
Maybe. I mean, something that Michael Peisty once said to me, which was quite a good analogy. He said, like, old Ks, they kind of sound like when you punch them. This sounds ridiculous. We don't mean this. When you punch an old guy in the stomach, he kind of wheezes, right? You punch a young guy in the stomach, and it's a bit more like hard and grunty, and it's this wheeze, this kind of like slightly dilapidated.
Yeah.
Is what the old Ks have, and it's not just that they're kind of a little harder because they're older. It's also that there probably are some micro cracks in there. They're a little bit fragile. They're a little bit falling apart at the edges, and that's what gives that sound. So I don't know how you replicate that, unless maybe you put a cymbal in a concrete mixer with a brick, and it just rattles around and gets hit and stuff. And I've thought about that. I've thought about like just putting a big drum on my lathe.
Yeah. Like
bashing a cymbal around for a few days and see what it does. And I've done it with triangles and triangle beater tips, but obviously in a smaller thing. With ball just to knock them up and artificially age them, you pre-age them. But there's probably a more practical way to do it with a cymbal, like maybe with almost like I don't know if you've ever seen like a landmine clearing vehicle. It's kind of got flail chains that kind of whiz around. Something like that, but not with metal chains. Maybe with like a whole lot of wooden. Just like whizzing around. But you'd probably want to put it in like a isolation sound booth. Your neighbors, and leave it running for 24 hours or something.
Right. Yeah, almost like a concrete mixer, a modified concrete mixer that would just tumble into the wood or something.
Yeah.
You'd have to almost like a soft, insulate the inside so there's no metal. You couldn't actually it wouldn't actually slam into the side of like the metal drum or whatever.
Yeah. It would take some arranging to
right.
Thing
it might not be worth
destroy it, but
all the effort. It might not be worth the effort, but that's something I'm working on is trying to kind of pre-age like various methods like burnishing and various patinas and just hammering methods, things to kind of like work on kind of replicating that brittle sound in a brand new cymbal. It's without going the Spitz-Aquino route of putting it in my oven for 4 hours.
The super risky approach.
Right.
I think just there's a dryness, I guess, that you get, and you can a heavy patina can bring a bit of that, or maybe even a lacquer. Normally you want to if you want to lacquer a cymbal. I generally don't, but you'd normally want it as thin as possible so it doesn't change the sound at all. But if you deliberately just put something a little heavier on there, that'll kind of give you that dryness and shorten the sustain. Because if you go too far, it kills the highs. But
I'll use different kinds of wax,
Mm-hmm.
and that seems to work well. But I don't love the film, like the way it feels. Like you can't really
Yeah.
do like a
Yeah.
scratch, like a brush scratch with the end of it. Like it doesn't really give you that same kind of tactile feel with the grooves. But
Yeah.
various
I
things
guess
like that.
something I've thought about but not experimented with a huge amount yet. It's kind of on the back burner to try to do at some point, and maybe you've thought about this. Wondering about like taking maybe a deliberately slightly too light blank so that you're not laying as much of the crust off. I mean, not like a Turk or a, where you can see remnants of oxide, but just where you're just under it rather than further in.
Yeah.
To a drier cymbal or a brighter cymbal. I
Yeah.
haven't figured it out, but it feels like they're if you go way too far, like you get kind of a pretty dead horrible thing. Certainly from a thick blank making a really thin cymbal. A, it's not economically a good idea, and B, it's a great sound. So I wonder if like varying the other way to taking less material.
I did recently. I've been working with like a very, very flat, wide bit that I purposely have it dull. It does leave the crust in the deeper hammering pits, but they're like as a way to really just shave like the lightest possible amount, skimming the surface basically, and then doing whatever weight removal is needed just from the underside. And that's given me a pretty good result actually, just as far as that kind of goes. But I've been thinking kind of in all these different realms, and usually you're taking like 10 different things and mashing it together, and then you realize like element number 8 doesn't work so well. Let's substitute that element, and then you have to think of it in combination with all these other elements to actually achieve like whatever you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that I guess the issue with cymbals is that every parameter affects every other parameter, doesn't it? Like, okay, you do something that will mainly change the pitch or mainly change the washiness or the complexity, but it affects other things, to a lesser degree. There's you can't do one thing in isolation. You can't keep everything else the same and just change this one thing.
Right.
It's the constant sort of balancing act and juggling act, I guess, to do things with cymbals and with their sounds. And it's also difficult to be super scientific and like just change one variable at a time because no two blanks are exactly the same. Unless you're Python, you never hammer something exactly the same.
Right.
So, well, actually, Zildjian do, but yeah, to their cymbals
are a little bit different.
But I think that's because each blank is different.
Yeah.
Heisty blanks are a lot more. Each one is the same.
Yeah. Would you say that their quality control is better too?
I don't know about that. I think it's more that they are effectively casting sheet B20.
Yeah.
Cutting discs out of it. So it can be more consistent. Everything can be tempered at exactly the same temperature. Because I think they're tempering them in like a conveyor oven type thing. Whereas Zildjian is more like the old Turkish method, although they're not using wood anymore.
Yeah.
But it's in an oven. I think they're rotating things around to try to keep it even, but still you're going to get a lot more variation with that. So individual ingots, variations in the exact temperature and time, variations in the quench water temperature. After you've done half a batch, like that water's a little warmer, cymbals are going to cool slightly slower. Still just a fraction of a second, but it's
enough, right? Yeah,
a little bit. So I think that's why.
Yeah,
and also the Swiss way. They want everything to be very precise and just like the other one.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the Zildjian is descending from the Turkish tradition, which is more like we're making a family of cymbals. We're not making exactly the same cymbal each time. That their parameter space for whatever model it is this big, whereas Pisces is that big.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a decision, conscious decision rather than a failing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's Yeah, what I tend to feel is that there's some sacrifice made by the tolerances being so small with Paiste, in that you just have a certain sonic characteristic that you would really associate with Paiste, and they do that sonic characteristic better than anybody else. I find that as far as like getting wider variances of sounds, like that's where you have obviously like the I guess the Masters series, but that's not even really made. That's not made by Paiste. If I'm understanding it correctly, they make that in Turkey. So
I think so.
I guess that's their attempt, or their way of capturing that other sonic world that they don't have with their method, I guess.
Yeah.
But of all the major companies, I feel like Paiste is the one that I have the most respect for. I think just because of the level of consistency and quality that they just seem to always put out. But
yes, it's quite incredible, really. If you think, a lot of the Zildjian stuff is like a robot hammer that's been programmed, and it's going to do exactly the same thing each time. Paiste using machine hammers, but it's hand guided still. It's still some right and adjusting the pressure with his foot pedal and all that kind of stuff. So
that saddle they use,
so consistent.
Yeah, so amazing. Yeah. But that's incredible. I honestly, I'm trying to think if I have any other questions for you, because I really wanted to talk to you. Well, I did want to talk to you real quick. I know we might need to wrap up here soon, but about patinas and your ideas on patina solutions. We touched briefly on the idea of just it can help dry out the sound. Do you use patinas as part of the visual effect alongside of with like fire treating and different things that you do? That's probably more on the B8 non-B20 side of things, but what's your take on the patina? Just take that however you want, just your method or your philosophy on that.
Yeah, I guess I have two different approaches. I have my sort of, it kind of looks like a vintage old cymbal patina, and then I have things that are just decorative or colors, or it's arty type stuff rather than trying to look vintage. It doesn't make that much of a difference. It enhances the stick a tiny bit, and it dries the cymbal out a tiny bit. It's not as big as you might think. Although I do tend to then put like a bit of an oil or a wax on, and that's the thing that actually dries it a little bit more. So in that respect, I guess it is more of a visual thing. Like we're back to the synesthesia thing about you expect it to sound a certain way if it looks a certain way. If you're putting it on a kit next to a bunch of old cymbals, you might not want a super shiny, brand new, regular finish cymbal there. Just the aesthetic of the whole kit. But yeah, I spent a while experimenting, trying to combine this chemical and that chemical, and like multiple steps, and to try to get something that looked sort of authentic and didn't rub off too easily. And I guess that's probably going to be my secret recipe, my only secret recipe.
Yeah, I wouldn't ask you to divulge the secrets.
But I know it's interesting. You see a lot of guys sort of experimenting with it, and you see sort of Spizzichino stuff. And everyone's different. Or I think the Agap 30th edition, they were doing something on those, if I have the right series. And there've been some Zildjian ones, and you look at the Zildjian ones and go, oh, that's, I know what that chemical is.
Yep, right.
There's like a bunch of usual suspects, I guess, in terms of something vaguely like a vintage cymbal.
Totally.
And some great fun things like if you want like a totally black cymbal, it's a relatively easy way to do that.
Right.
It doesn't kill the sound too much either. But it's stinky and messy and
rotten eggs kind of thing.
yeah, that's the one.
Yep. That's awesome. So we're both going to be in Chicago in
That's right.
May. So what are you are you prepping for that show now, kind of getting your stuff together, or is that going to come later?
It will probably be a bit later, but I'm thinking about prepping.
Yes, which that could be called prepping. You could.
I'm at that stage. Yeah, because it's not that far off now. What, a month and a half, something?
Yes, coming up soon. I'm kind of scrambling to start prepping, like
Yeah,
what you're talking about.
yeah. I'm sort of offering a lot more to people because most of the cymbals I make are someone just gets in touch, says, "Can you make a cymbal like this for me?" My website is so out of date. There's nothing on there for sale really, other than triangles and things that are line items.
Yeah.
The whole website's like 10 years old. I really need to redo it. So yeah, 95% of the cymbals I make, someone's asked for a specific cymbal. So I'm not just making cymbals to have stock, unless I'm about to do the Chicago Drum Show or PASIC or something like that. So yes, just now people are asking for things, and I'm saying I'm going to make you two, so you can choose which one you prefer, and then I'll have a piece of stock.
There you go. Yeah,
well, they don't know. So I'm starting to dovetail, I guess, from doing commissioned orders into producing stock. Probably the week before, I'll be mad just making extra stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, I need to start thinking about shipping some things ahead and getting, because Steve Weiss Music, they sell some of my triangles and a couple of other things. And for some years now, they keep hold of a load of rack for me and like a banner and stuff. Because often we're at the same show together, so that they'll bring it for me in their truck. Super brilliant guys.
That's awesome.
Very helpful. So I'll ask them, can you ship these bits to Chicago? So I need to remember to do that in enough time to give them, so they're not running around. I think I'm going to ship some hi-hat stands out, because I always like renting or borrowing hi-hat stands. I mean, look, I have like 6 here. Yeah. I haven't 6 at a drum show in the UK or Europe for 10 years. Like ship 3 of them to the States, to Chicago, and then send them back with the stuff to Steve Weiss. So then I've got 3 hi-hat stands.
There you go. Yeah.
So all that little logistic stuff I've been thinking about, making some stock I've been thinking about. It will be mainly cymbals. I'm probably not going to bring any gongs, maybe a couple of small pieces, the kind of thing you could hang on a boom stand rather than a big rack frame.
Yeah.
Maybe a handful of triangles for, if any orchestral guys come and have a look and listen. I haven't figured out what I'm going to talk about. I'm supposed to, where most of us are giving a talk or being interviewed. I think that's an option, just to have questions asked of you. I think I'll try to plan something. Mm-hmm. I guess that's been a thought, to talk to the other guys and figure out what we're all thinking of talking about. So
that would be a good idea for us to
different aspects,
Yeah, coordinate on that. So
how about yourself? What have you been starting to make plans or make stock or?
Yeah, I'm trying right now to get started, because I always wait too long, and then the last 2 weeks is just a mad dash, and I exhaust myself before you go do the trade show, which, as you know, is incredibly exhausting. So then you end up
those are like full on talking to people all day, noise around all day. Yeah, the evenings are usually fairly full on as well.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be great this year. What was it? 8 Cymbalsmiths? Is it 8 independents?
Yeah, 8 of us are going to speak, which is I feel. I mean, personally, I feel like I'm pitching myself that I'm even included. I'm kind of like, this is awesome. Like I feel like I've just been messing around for years doing this because I love it, and then to actually see like, oh, it's connecting with people, and I'm starting to become like part of the community. Feels like a gift. It's pretty awesome. So.
I mean, I've probably only met 1 or 2 of the guys who are going to be there, so it's nice, to actually meet.
Yeah, is it Collingwood and Paul? Is that all it is?
Collingwood, Paul, Burke. I think. Cool. I met yourself virtually today.
Yep.
I don't think off the top of my head I've met any of the guys. So.
Yeah, should be fun.
Yeah, and I think as you sort of alluded to earlier, we each do our own thing. It's not like we're stepping on each other's toes or competing. We're all working together in a way, but separately.
Right.
Different drummers, different needs, on how about your own little approaches. It is rather than a competition. I mean, there's a little bit, but I think that's just more motivation than trying to do, trying to beat someone. We're not trying to win, but it
ends up becoming like spurring each other on. Yeah.
Yeah,
keep advancing and growing and developing as a maker. But then as far as like, I think there is a more than enough to go around. So it's kind of nice. I mean, that's why I do this podcast, is like, I kind of want there to be a place where you can hear a conversation with every independent cymbalsmith that would agree to talk to me, and then there can be this idea that, your pieces are going to have a character that is unique to you that no other maker can replicate. And the same with all of us. And that can be translated into our artistic voice as musicians. And we can think, okay, I want to capture this vibe. So I think I need a Dave Collingwood for that. And I need a Matt Nolan for this other vibe. And then I can kind of create my color palettes. And, if anything, we're taking away from Big Cymbal, which I feel fine to do that. So we can compete with them, and maybe
they can probably take it as well.
Yeah, they'll be fine. Yeah.
They'll be fine. Yeah. I don't think how many cymbals do they make a day from those factories? Like, they're not even going to notice.
Yeah.
Sales and statuses. Yeah, they'll be fine.
Paul told me that he, in like 7 years, he lathed like tens of thousands.
Yeah, it's a huge number. I remember he told me at PASIC that he kind of, actually before PASIC, that he'd like added it up in his head, thinking, well, how many did I do a day and how long was I doing it? Yeah, wow.
It's crazy. I might be wrong. I might be remembering this wrong, but I want to say it was like in the hundreds of thousands over the course of his career.
Yeah, it might have been 500,000. It was a lot.
That's wild. And of course, Zildjian, he always talks about how he lathes at Zildjian speeds, which is, I think it's like nearly 900 RPMs is what his lathe operates at.
That scares me.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Anything that goes wrong and you're just, you're headed to the afterlife, right?
Yeah. I mean, I know a drum builder who was like turning a stave shell on a lathe and then embedded wood in the ceiling and stuff when it all went wrong. So imagine that 900 RPM with sharp metal.
With sharp metal, yeah.
I mean, the Zildjian factory machines, they got that big cowl around, metal thing that does dust extraction and everything else, but also, I guess if anything did go wrong, although probably with the Zildjian blacks, they probably never have an issue like that. But you might with a Turkish one, every now and again have something go nasty.
Yeah.
A little casting floor or something where it's a bit of ash has got rolled into it. You see that.
I would imagine that happens.
I'm happy at like 300-ish.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Right. Yeah. 400 is kind of like my max. Any more and my stand starts to kind of get some rattle, and so I don't broach it. I can deal at like 385. That's fine for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if you've got something with like big divots in it, like you kind of got to go slower anyway, otherwise your tool's just skipping over all the.
Yeah. It's weird that I've seen a lot of some independent makers actually design in lathe chatter. Like they actually want that.
Yeah.
Which I find that to be fascinating. I mean, that was always like the thing to try to stay away from. And at least as you're trying to learn it, it's like, oh, don't do the various little things to kind of avoid that. But I'm seeing more and more of it pop up as kind of like a feature, not a bug,
Yeah. It can work.
Yeah, it captures the sound.
There's a point maybe when you start making things too perfect, they don't look handmade anymore.
Yeah,
right. They lose their appeal, their sort of organic nature that the drummers that like that kind of thing just like starts getting too slick, too perfect, perfectly imperfect. Then you might as well buy a Peistinger, isn't it?
There you go, exactly. Buy a Peistinger Zildjian. Matt, right. Yeah. Matt, thank you so much for doing this. I think we could probably talk for like hours longer, but we'll save that for Chicago for some beers after one of the long grueling days.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good to me.
Seriously, it's been an honor. You're like I said, one of my heroes and the guys I look up to in this industry. And thank you for what you've given and what you've kind of paved the way, how you've paved the way for guys like me to do this. So it's a real honor.
Thank you so much. I've had a good time talking to you.
There we go. All right, guys. This has been the Reverie podcast. We'll catch you guys next time. See ya.